My name is Ava Cole. I'm 29, and I learned early that silence can be a scalpel. People assume it is weakness. They don't notice how clean a cut can be until the first drop lands. They called me the housekeeper the night Crystal cut the light at the Grand Regent. They laughed about phantom gains and borrowed prestige, while I finished the 14th month of rebuilding real paychecks for real families. I wasn't mopping floors. I was cleaning balance sheets, habits, and lies. When the screens flipped and my face filled them, the room didn't go quiet because of me. It went quiet because numbers do not flinch. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're listening from on this beautiful planet. Drop a comment and don't forget to subscribe. Your support is a real boost for making better videos. Thank you for being here and listening to this story. I started in a studio apartment above a bodega in Brooklyn where the radiator hissed like it had opinions. Rent was a calculation, not a comfort. My desk was a door on two sawhorses, stained with years of coffee rings. The first client was a Lebanese bakery with a line at dawn and a ledger that bled by noon. We cut 12 items, rebuilt vendor terms, and turned waste into margin. 2 bakers kept their jobs that week, then a steakhouse that had traded tradition for chaos, then a wood furniture plant in New Jersey, crushed by lopsided contracts and swollen roots. I took a third of what the big firms quoted and saved them about $230,000 a month by rerouting trucks and renegotiating union schedules without breaking a single promise. Word traveled the way it always should, storefront to storefront, not billboard to billboard. A grocer told a cafe owner told a tailor. By month 8, my phone rang with a kind of whisper. Call Ava if you want to live through winter. I built a team that favored backbone over pedigree. Priya left a famous bank because she hated making slides that hid the truth. Daniel spotted fraud like some people spot typos. Mariah kept the moving parts from shearing each other. I didn't buy prestige. I rented nothing. I kept receipts. We moved to a glass corner in Lower Manhattan. Sun spilled across concrete, and for the first time, the city didn't feel like it was holding me under. I hung 3 frames on the wall, a clean P&L from the bakery, a union letter that simply said thanks, and a photo of my old door desk to remember the cost of clarity. Clients arrived without ads. Restaurant owners brought friends from other trades, printing, packaging, light manufacturing. Every win made us plainer, not louder. The work didn't need adjectives. At home, my family heard none of it. Brandon measured worth in tickers and table placements. My mother polished his legend like it was silver that tarnished if you breathed on it. When they spoke of me, it was as if I were an absence that cleaned itself. One night, after the team left and the skyline turned to a grid of coals, an email hit my inbox. Subject line, Forbes. Feature on self-made restructuring founders. Would I be open to an interview and potentially a cover depending on the reporting? I leaned back and watched the city glow like a map of mistakes we could still fix. The answer wasn't pride, it was logistics. Timing changes the mass of a truth. I closed the laptop and said it out loud anyway, to no one. The cover is coming. Tomorrow, I'd sit under chandeliers with a badge that wasn't meant for dignity. They'd hand me Housekeeper and wait for me to choke on it. I'd pin it where the light could find it. The dinner in Tribeca wasn't casual. Crystal glasses, white tablecloths, chandeliers overhead. It was meant to impress. Brandon thrived in rooms like this. He arrived late, as always, grinning like he owned the place. He shook every hand, made small talk, and when he finally sat down, he raised his glass like the evening was his show. Our portfolio is up 21% this quarter, he said loudly. We added structured credit at the perfect time. Heads nodded around the table. Then a guest looked across at me. And you, Ava, what do you do? I opened my mouth, but Brandon cut in. She keeps mom-and-pop shops from shutting down. Cute side projects. Laughter rippled. My mother leaned in with a sweet smile. Ava's always loved helping the little people. It gives her purpose. She tapped her glass to move the conversation back to Brandon. The words sounded gentle, but they landed like a verdict. I didn't argue. I asked the server about the entree instead, letting the moment pass, but I watched the faces around the table. Most nodded at Brandon's story. One man didn't. Wireframe glasses, plain navy suit, calm expression. He studied Brandon when the numbers slipped out too easily. He glanced at me when Brandon exaggerated. Brandon grew bolder, tossing out names of companies and exit dates. One was flat out wrong by days. I knew because I track filings. The man in glasses set his fork down and didn't pick it up again. During the second course, he leaned slightly my way. "Ethan Drake," he said. "Partner." His voice was low. Some numbers I've seen in internal summaries don't match the decks being shown. Might be rounding, might be more. Brandon lifted his voice again. "We're building real wealth, not counting receipts." My mother followed quickly. "Ava has such a big heart," she said. "She's not built for the hard game." She wrapped the insult in kindness and moved on. The guest beside her gave me a pitying smile and turned back to a gallery story. I asked Ethan quietly, "Do the internal reports include counterparty notes?" "They should," he said. "The ones I saw didn't." The waiter refilled glasses. A guest asked Brandon about crypto. He gave a vague line about exploring carefully. He looked proud of himself for sounding measured. Ethan shifted an inch closer. "If you want to compare notes, I'd value your take." He slid a card under my napkin like it was nothing. Dessert came. Brandon raised a toast to real builders. The table clapped. I stayed quiet, then asked one question. "How do you verify performance before you add it to a deck?" "Audited statements," one man said. "Trade confirms," a woman added. "Relationships," Brandon declared. Two people exchanged a quick look. My mother jumped in again. "Ava, let's not get technical. We're celebrating." By then, the knots were tied. Brandon had spoken numbers out loud. My mother had confirmed her role in keeping me small, and Ethan had left me a signal that mattered. When coffee was served, Ethan stood. "Good to meet you." This time, he set his card on the table where everyone could see. I turned it over with my thumb. On the back, one line was printed clearly. "Call me when you're ready." That night, my apartment looked nothing like a place to live. The dining table was buried in binders and 3 encrypted drives. I had marked everything so there was no confusion. Red for contracts, blue for transfers, yellow for witness notes. No decoration, no comfort, just evidence. Mara Leclerc sat across from me, posture sharp, pen tapping lightly against her notebook. She had the look of someone who'd spent half her life stripping lies apart in front of judges. "What matters now," she said, "is that you control the timeline and never let him get ahead of you." I slid the 3 drives across the table. "Backups," I told her. "One locked here, one mirrored in the cloud, one off-site." She studied me for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Good. He can deny stories. He can't erase numbers." Ethan Drake joined us later. No champagne, no small talk, just folders, more gaps in Brandon's reporting, more threads to pull. I scanned them quickly, adding notes to the binders already on the table. The deeper we looked, the clearer the picture became. Brandon had left fingerprints on everything. We worked until midnight, mapping what to show, when to show it, and who needed to see it first. The binders grew heavier with every page, but so did my resolve. This wasn't about speculation anymore. It was about survival. For me, for everyone tied to his games without knowing it. The next morning, I sent my assistant to a storage facility to pick up a box of invoices from one of the businesses I had restructured. Those files were legally mine, part of a transfer agreement. Brandon must have caught wind, because when she arrived, his security man was already there. She bent to lift the box. He shoved her so hard she hit the floor. Her cry echoed in the empty hall. I stepped in, voice steady but sharp. "That box is under my contract. You want to fight over it, do it in court." I pulled it free from his grip. The guard just glared, but he didn't try again. My assistant stood slowly, rubbing her arm, the bruise already forming. That evening, Mara photographed the bruise and added it to the files. "Judges hate intimidation," she said. "This only helps us." I thought that was the end of it, until my phone rang. Brandon. His voice was low, venom hidden behind false calm. "You think you're clever, Ava? I know what you're digging through. Stop now, or I'll make sure you never sit at another table in this city again." I let him talk. When he stopped, I stayed silent for 3 beats, then hung up without a word. He thought fear would stop me. All it did was harden my focus. I set the phone down carefully, as if it might shatter. My hand didn't shake. That surprised me. For years, I had absorbed his venom in silence. Tonight, silence became my sharpest weapon. Later that night, I walked back into the dining room. The binders were stacked like ammunition. The drives gleamed under the lamp, 3 bullets locked and loaded. This wasn't a home anymore. It was a war room. Mara closed her notebook with a firm snap. Ethan leaned back, arms folded. "This ends at the Grand Regent Gala," Mara said. I met their eyes. "Then that's our deadline. Everything lands at the gala." The room went quiet. Outside, the city hummed with noise. Inside, we had just armed the bomb. And once the timer started, there was no diffusing it. The Grand Regent glittered like it wanted to blind me. Crystal chandeliers, velvet curtains, marble polished, until every reflection mocked you. I walked through the entrance alone, knowing every detail tonight was engineered for one purpose: to humiliate me. At the check-in desk, the woman shuffled badges until she pulled one out slowly. Gold script, deliberate and cruel. Housekeeper. Her eyes flicked up, waiting for me to protest. I didn't. I pinned it to my dress like it was jewelry. A ripple moved through the line of guests. That's his sister, the housekeeper. Inside the ballroom, the insult grew teeth. My table had 8 place settings and only 7 chairs. Not a mistake, an act. I stood there long enough for people to notice before a server rushed over with a chair, cheeks pink, mumbling apologies. Around me, laughter disguised as charm filled the air. Then came the sharper blade. My mother approached in sequins that sparkled like armor. She leaned in close enough for only a few to hear, but loud enough for the sting to land. "At least you finally found a role that suits you," she whispered. Her hand brushed the badge as if to emphasize it. Then she glided away, leaving perfume and poison in equal measure. I felt eyes on me, waiting for a reaction. Instead of hiding the badge, I adjusted it so the pin caught the chandelier light, tilting my body slightly when a photographer raised his camera. If they wanted a picture, they would get one, but on my terms. Brandon's fiancée leaned across her table, sequins throwing sparks as she snapped a photo and laughed openly. My phone buzzed within minutes, a contact forwarding me the screenshot with the caption, "Not everyone belongs in marble halls." She thought she'd scored a victory. What she didn't know was that her post was about to collide with Brandon's smear campaign, both timed to drop before the night's main event. What she couldn't see was that my filings were already queued, mirrored across servers, waiting for the exact same moment. Their gossip and my proof were heading for collision. Dinner service began. Servers poured Bordeaux, plates of truffle risotto laid down like trophies. Brandon made his entrance, late, polished, soaking in applause. He shook hands, slapped backs, kissed cheeks. He loved the theater. Then his eyes cut across the room and found me. His smile sharpened. He walked by my table, slowing just enough to land the blow. "Careful with that badge, Ava," he said, voice pitched for nearby ears. "Wouldn't want people to think you actually belong here." The surrounding laughter was soft, complicit. I held his gaze, then shifted my posture deliberately so the badge glinted brighter under the light. Cameras snapped. Guests who thought they were laughing at me had just helped me create the image I wanted. Their staged humiliation captured forever, a piece of evidence as sharp as any document in my drives. For a brief moment, the room quieted around me. I scanned the senators, the hedge fund managers, the old family acquaintances, all ready to nod at Brandon's performance and dismiss me. They thought this was his stage. They thought the insult was working. But my proof was already primed, mirrored across drives, timed down to the second. They couldn't see the fuse burning, but I could. The knot tightened in my chest. My role tonight wasn't to argue or defend. It was to endure, to gather every insult like kindling, and then to strike the match when the hour came. I pressed the badge flat against my dress with one steady hand, lifted my chin, and stepped forward. My heels cracked against the marble like a countdown. The ballroom thought it had swallowed me. In reality, I was already setting it on fire. The ballroom buzzed with noise, glasses clinking, forks against porcelain, Brandon's voice booming across the tables. He was in his element, bragging about a billion-dollar acquisition and nodding at every fake laugh. I sat silent, my phone face down on the table, feeling the weight of what was about to unfold. Then it happened. The projector screens lining the ballroom flickered. The Navarro Capital crest dissolved, replaced by a bold magazine cover. My face, my name. The headline, "From Housekeeper to Self-Made Billionaire, Ava Cole Reshapes the Future of Business." The sound in the room cracked. Forks dropped, a wine glass tipped. Even the string quartet faltered mid-note. For a second, nobody breathed. Then the whispers began. "Is that Forbes? How?" Phones lit up across the room, notifications buzzing like a swarm. Brandon froze, champagne glass mid-air. His smirk collapsed. I rose slowly, clutching a thick envelope in my hand, the one labeled Project Valor. My heels echoed on the marble floor as I stepped toward the podium. Every eye tracked me now. I laid the envelope on the microphone stand, peeled it open, and lifted the stack of documents high. "These," I said, steady and clear, "are whistleblower filings already time-stamped and submitted." The projector switched again. Ethan had timed it perfectly. Screens filled with spreadsheets, wire transfers, offshore accounts. Each document bore a digital hash code, time-stamped and verified. Every investigator on the SEC's mailing list was receiving the files at this exact moment. The ballroom was watching the proof go live. Panic hit like a wave. A hedge fund manager shouted into his phone, "Dump everything before market open!" A senator's aide scribbled notes, eyes wide. Across the room, Brandon tried to laugh, but it came out thin and cracked. "It's exaggeration," he muttered. "Forbes embellishes. She's unstable." But nobody looked at him. I kept speaking. "For years, you applauded speculation," I said, my voice carrying. "Tonight, you're seeing reality." Then chaos. Brandon surged toward me, face twisted, glass in hand. He hurled it across the podium. It shattered on the marble, shards spraying against my arm. A piece sliced near my elbow, stinging sharp. Gasps ripped through the room. Guests recoiled. Security moved fast, 2 guards grabbing him as he lunged again. His voice cracked into a scream. "She's nothing, nothing!" Cameras flashed. Phones filmed. The golden air of Navarro Capital thrashing in front of chandeliers like a drunk in a bar fight. The room dissolved into frenzy. Investors bolted for the exits, dialing brokers. Journalists shoved forward, recording every second. My mother sat frozen, lips tight, finally seeing the dynasty unravel. I pressed my hand to the podium, steady despite the sting in my arm. The badge still glinted on my chest. Housekeepers. Catching the projector light next to my Forbes cover, the contrast was undeniable. Brandon roared, thrashing against security. "Let me go! She's lying!" But no one was listening. His voice drowned under the sound of 100 notifications, of investors watching their fortunes collapse in real time. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. The documents on the screen spoke louder than anything I could say. The ballroom, once polished and perfect, had become a storm, and in the center of it, security dragged Brandon back as the crowd broke apart, panic spreading like fire. The gala wasn't his stage anymore. It was his undoing. And this was only the beginning. The ballroom had lost its polish. Waiters froze mid-step, guests clutched their phones, and the screens behind me rolled on. Page after page lit up. Wire transfers, offshore accounts, falsified valuations. Each file was stamped, signed, undeniable. I turned slightly, letting the projector do the work. "This isn't rumor," I said. "These are filings, backed up in 3 places, already in federal hands." Across the room, the effect was immediate. Compliance officers were dialing partners on speaker, their voices urgent. "Confirm positions. Freeze exposure now." One banker actually dropped his fork and whispered, "That's our fund she's showing." Brandon was still restrained, his jacket ripped, tie askew. "It's lies," he yelled, but the words barely carried. Investors weren't listening to him anymore. They were listening to their screens. And then came the break I never expected. My mother, Isabel, who had defended Brandon at every table for years, quietly pushed her chair back. She looked at him, her face unreadable, and said in a voice cold enough to slice the room, "How careless you've been." The air shifted. That single sentence cut deeper than my documents. It was the first time she had not shielded him. A silence followed, sharp and absolute. Brandon's eyes went wide, as if he'd been struck. I felt the knot loosen slightly inside me. The proof was already fatal, but her words severed something symbolic. The dynasty had lost its defender. Not everyone wanted to stay and watch the collapse. Midway through the second wave of documents, valuation emails bearing Brandon's signature, a senator at the head table stood abruptly. His aide leaned in, whispering something urgent, and they both slipped out. Their departure was obvious, deliberate. Cameras caught it instantly. Distance yourself before it spreads. The room began to fracture. Groups huddled, some rushing for the exits, others whispering furiously. Guests who had clapped for Brandon minutes earlier now refused to meet his eyes. I lifted another page from the envelope, holding it up so the projector caught every line. "Quarterly statements don't lie," I said, "not when they're signed and time-stamped." A compliance officer shouted across the room to her team, "Pull the plug pre-market, now." The ripple was turning into a wave. Phones buzzed, alerts flashing. Hedge fund managers muttered to brokers, "Get out before the open, dump everything." Brandon's voice cracked again. "She's jealous, she's unstable." But his words rang hollow against the steady pulse of evidence flowing across the screens. The investors weren't calculating whether I was jealous. They were calculating their losses. I scanned the crowd. My father sat rigid, staring at nothing, the authority drained from him. My mother didn't look at either of us. She had said her one line and withdrawn, letting the dynasty burn. The weight of the badge on my chest reminded me what this was about. They had tried to write me out of the family. Tonight I had written myself back in, with numbers that no one could erase. The projector flipped again. Offshore shells in Dubai, signed valuations, fraudulent transfers. The room moved in waves of panic. One banker's voice carried above the noise. "Orders in pre-market. Flood them now." The clock had turned. The fall wasn't waiting for morning. It had already begun. The ballroom was already fraying. Guests no longer leaned toward Brandon for cues. They leaned away as if distance might shield them. The chandeliers sparkled the same way they had at the start of the night, but the light no longer belonged to him. It illuminated a downfall. Then came the strike that turned whispers into silence. A diamond ring clattered across marble, the sound crisp enough to cut through every conversation. Brandon's fiancée stood, her bare hand trembling only once before she steadied it. "I won't marry a fraud," she said, each syllable clipped and final. The gem rolled under a chair, lost to the glittering floor. Gasps traveled around the room like a current. She didn't run. She walked, heels deliberate, cutting a straight path to the exit. Guests pulled back to let her through. Phones angled up. No one stopped her. No one defended him. By the time the doors closed behind her, her words had branded the night. Brandon lunged against the guards restraining him. Get back here, he shouted, his voice cracking. It wasn't authority anymore. It was desperation. He looked smaller than he had ever allowed himself to look in public. The tables shifted. A hedge fund executive, someone who had toasted Brandon a dozen times before, pushed his chair back. "We're done," he muttered, not even pretending discretion. He left without finishing his drink. Others followed. Some made excuses, some didn't bother. The room wasn't a circle of allies anymore. It was a slow, visible abandonment. Ethan Drake rose next. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Calmness carried farther now than shouting ever could. "I've worked with Navarro Capital," he said, his tone even. "I've seen Brandon's numbers. They don't hold." He held a memo in his hand. One page, plain, almost unimpressive at first glance. He placed it on a table, then another on the next table like markers left behind for others to follow. "If you'd like proof," he said, "look for yourself." Phones tilted down. Screens captured lines of text. No projector, no fireworks, just ink and dates. That was enough. Brandon spat words like sparks. "Lies! He's lying! You're finished, Drake!" His voice carried, but his power didn't. No one rose to defend him. They only stared at the paper now sliding across linen like contraband. A woman tucked one into her clutch as if she were preserving a relic. And then the audio hit. The sound system crackled, static. Then my father's voice, deep and unmistakable. "You think you can challenge us, Ava? I'll bury you before you see daylight." It was short, brutal, unarguable. The silence that followed was thicker than any uproar. Heads turned, not toward Brandon, not toward Ethan, toward me. Some looked away quickly, ashamed for even watching. Others muttered what didn't need explanation. "That's her father." Brandon sagged in his restraints, face white. The empire had been shredded by evidence, but the dynasty itself had now been cut open by its patriarch. My father had meant to scare me into silence. Instead, he had broadcast the rot. I didn't flinch. Inside, the words pressed hard, but they didn't crush me. They confirmed what I already knew, that he had been complicit from the start, that the dynasty had been built not just on lies, but on threats whispered in the dark. I stepped out of the ballroom for air. The corridor was quieter, lined with gilded mirrors that reflected back a woman I barely recognized, chin lifted, badge glinting under the lights, not diminished, but sharpened. From the shadows, he emerged. Lewis Cole, my father. The man whose voice had just betrayed itself to 100 phones and 1,000 eyes. His expression was darker than I had ever seen it. He grabbed my arm. "End this now," he hissed. "You're destroying us all. Do you understand? You are cutting your own bloodline open for vultures." I pried his hand free and let it hang in the air for the security nearby to witness. "No," I said, my voice steady. "You destroyed yourselves. I'm only refusing to clean it up in private anymore." His jaw clenched. He leaned closer, the old move. Intimidation by proximity. But the guards moved faster, stepping in, separating us. Cameras flashed. Guests in the hallway gasped. The patriarch of Navarro Capital dragged back from his daughter like a man caught mid-crime. It was the image no spin doctor could erase. A dynasty split not just by scandal but by blood. Father against daughter, under the chandeliers of their own making. When I returned to the ballroom, eyes followed. Some with curiosity, some with fear, a few with something new, respect. Brandon shouted from across the room, voice ragged. "She's nothing! She's nothing!" But no one answered him. His words hit the floor and stayed there. I touched the badge pinned to my chest. The same insult they had weaponized was catching every beam of light. "By morning," I said, steady enough for the nearest tables to hear and repeat, "the freeze orders will be signed." No one laughed. No one scoffed. The sentence settled into the room like law. The chandeliers still glowed, the curtains still shimmered, but the dynasty was already over. Everyone knew it. Morning headlines landed like verdicts. SEC freezes Navarro capital assets. Federal probe expands into crypto fraud. Golden heir facing collapse. By noon, the penthouse was empty. Not ransacked. That would suggest a fight. It was simply drained of life. The furniture Brandon had curated, the art he'd hung to impress senators, the wine collection he'd bragged about, frozen like a museum exhibit, seized, tagged, and cataloged by federal agents who didn't care about the stories behind each piece. Brandon himself was moved to a holding cell in Lower Manhattan. The transition from silk sheets to a metal bench happened in the span of a morning. When cameras caught him entering federal court, he wasn't the man who had commanded ballrooms. His suit, the same one from the gala, was wrinkled, collar dark with sweat. His hands, once so steady signing phantom deals, now trembled as they pressed against the defense table. The charges stacked up like overdue bills: securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction of justice, each read aloud in a monotone that stripped away glamour and left only weight. When the judge announced 14 years, Brandon's head dropped. The golden heir, who had never heard no from anyone who mattered, finally heard it from the law. 14 years. The number followed his name across every ticker, every trading desk, every whispered conversation. Not Brandon Cole, the visionary, just Brandon Cole, 14 years. My mother called once. I didn't answer. She left no voicemail, sent no text, just the missed call, sitting on my screen like a question she couldn't figure out how to ask. A week later, a letter arrived, handwritten on cream paper embossed with her initials. Inside, only 3 sentences. I see now what I refused to see before. You were right to do what you did. I don't expect forgiveness. I folded it once and placed it in a drawer. Not as absolution, she'd had years to see and chose blindness, but as acknowledgement. Some silences weren't weapons, they were simply the sound of someone realizing too late that they'd chosen wrong. I never replied. That silence was mine to keep. The day before renovations began, I returned to the Grand Regent. The ballroom was stripped bare, no linens, no laughter, just marble and glass. My heels echoed louder now, each step ringing against walls that had once absorbed the sound of my humiliation. I walked to the spot where my table had been, the one with 7 chairs instead of 8. I remembered the smirk of the hostess when she handed me the badge, the laughter that rippled like applause, the flash of a phone capturing me as entertainment. From my bag, I pulled the badge. I had kept it, not as a wound, but as proof of distance traveled. The gold letters, Housekeeper, still caught the light. I set it down on the marble, exactly where my chair should have been, and stepped back. The chandelier still sparkled. The marble still gleamed. But this room no longer held power over me. It was mine now, mine to tear down, mine to rebuild, mine to fill with voices that wouldn't be drowned out. I turned once at the exit. The badge sat there, small and gold, already looking like a relic. By next week, it would be swept up with debris, and that felt exactly right. I didn't need to burn it, I just needed to leave it behind and keep walking. That fall, the Cole Estate Academy for Women Entrepreneurs opened its doors. 20 founders, each with ideas the world had tried to shrink. I still remember one, a 23-year-old pitching a supply chain app for immigrant-owned grocery stores. She had users, feedback, even a prototype, but every investor she'd met dismissed it as a nice idea for your community. Your community, as if scale belonged to someone else. We gave her seed funding and space. 6 months later, her app ran in 47 stores across 3 states, not because we gave her permission, because we gave her proof. Proof her numbers worked, proof her model scaled, proof that community was just another word for market someone else hadn't bothered to serve. That was the Academy's real work, not teaching ambition, these women already had that, but teaching them how to turn proof into power, the kind no one could wave away over champagne. Meanwhile, Nexus launched our DeFi platform for small businesses. Transparent, verifiable, no predatory rates. Brandon had built on permission, on who he could charm or threaten. I wanted to build on proof, numbers no smear could erase. Justice hadn't given me back the years I lost or erased nights I spent in that studio apartment, wondering if clarity was worth loneliness, but it gave me something better than vengeance. The chance to build a system that wouldn't repeat the same rot. Brandon would serve his sentence. My father's threats would live forever in audio, preserved in digital amber. But I didn't need their downfall to be the last line of this story. What I needed was this. The next woman walking into a room shouldn't have to choose between being heard and being liked. She should arrive with proof and leave with respect. Not because she played the game better, but because we changed the rules. The lesson fit on a wall, but took everything to earn. Build on proof, not permission. That's what survived the fire. That's what will outlast all of us. Before I close, I want to ask, where are you listening from? What corner of the world are you in right now? Drop a comment below, I'd love to know. And if this story meant something to you, hit subscribe. Your support keeps these stories alive. Thank you for proving, again, that truth always finds an audience.